This is the Ear Science Podcast, the science of healthy hearing.
Hello and welcome to the Ear Science Podcast, the science of healthy hearing, proudly presented by Ear Science Institute Australia, a medical research institute. In this podcast, we'll bring you into our world, the world of ear and hearing science, together with Dr. David Sly, auditory neuroscientist and Chief Operating Officer of Research at Ear Science. We will discuss the little-known phenomenon, hidden hearing loss.
My name is Dan Vandermeer.
And I'm Lisa Kutsia, and we are your podcast hosts.
David, welcome to the Ear Science Podcast, the science of healthy hearing.
Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Lisa. Happy to be here.
Thank you. David, in this podcast, we've spoken a lot about hearing loss. And as an audiologist, and I have a brother with hearing loss, I know hearing loss is often referred to as invisible, an invisible disability because we can't see it. The impact is, however, great. But I know when you're talking about hidden hearing loss, you're not talking or referring to this at all. So can you please explain to our listeners what hidden hearing loss is?
Sure. Thanks, Lisa. I think that probably the easiest way to start explaining it is to explain a little bit about hearing loss first before I talk about hidden hearing loss. So hearing loss is a big problem. It's 1 in 6 people typically will have some experience of hearing loss in their lifetime. There's different types of hearing loss. There might be noise-induced hearing loss due to medications, due to disease, due to genetic causes or aging. But regardless of the cause, we've done pretty well since at least World War II in detecting hearing loss. So for the most part, we've used a test called an audiogram, and that's done pretty well at detecting a lot of hearing loss. But there is some type of hearing loss that we haven't really detected all that well at the moment. And we've known about this for quite a while. Audiologists and doctors have known about this. And it's hidden hearing loss. And the reason we call it hidden hearing loss is because it's sort of hidden from that standard test, from the audiogram. So anecdotally, the type of experience where patients and caregivers and doctors might know about this is a patient says that I can't hear my partner at a noisy restaurant. I can't hear in social situations in a noisy background environment. Then they go to the clinic and they pass the audiogram. So we think, we think there is, the patient thinks there is a problem, and there is a problem if they experience it. That's really there.
Yep.
But our tests are just not always detecting that problem.
Right.
So that's what we're calling hidden hearing loss, and it was given a name. So we've known about it for kind of years.
Yep.
But given that name in 2011 in recognition, we're picking it up a bit more or aware of it a bit more.
Yeah. So legitimately, I hadn't heard of that term until today. So how common is it, David?
Well, it's around about 5% of people in the studies that have been done. So as I said, anecdotally, it's been known about for a while. I don't think anybody collected any stats on that. But 2 big studies that have been done in the last few years, since the term's been coined, have found around about 5% of people who have experience or subjective experience of not being able to hear in noisy environments. They pass an audiogram. About 5% of people have that. It may be even more because some people may not just be going into the clinic.
Yes, to get tested. Yeah.
Get tested.
Yep.
David, can I comment? You say 5% to sort of what the research is saying. But when I, as an audiologist, having trouble in background noise and that, you hear that all the time. And if I look at our clinical data, there are a lot of people and a significant proportion of the clients coming into our clinics that don't present with what we would consider as an audiologist a hearing loss. So really, I would almost want to say that percentage is higher with the amount of people we see in the clinic that doesn't have what we call a 3-frequency average of that we would consider a hearing loss.
Yeah.
Or greater than 25.
I think you may be right. That 5% is probably conservative, and some of your data might be pushing us more towards realistic statistics. Of course, there's some people might be coming in for referrals, and maybe they don't have a hearing loss, but we a lot of us in the field think that the number is likely to be much higher than 5%.
Right. Yeah. David, we've talked many times in this podcast series about my failed career as a rock star, but obviously exposed to lots of loud music and loud situations. I think you mentioned it before, but am I right in saying that hidden hearing loss is typically noise induced? And if so, what are the common causes of that, like being a failed rock star? Yes.
Well, it's we think likely noise, and we think that from laboratory studies. It could be other causes as well, just when it's undetected. But a big thing, and these sort of two areas that came together in recent years, is that clinical observation, and the other one is studies in the laboratory around about just a bit before 2011, where they're finding that after long noise exposure, that there's damage inside the inner ear, damage to the nerves, and that those levels of noise exposure can damage the nerves before we can sort of detect threshold changes, kind of like the audiogram type changes. So we think, therefore, that the nerves, the way I like to say is the nerves are likely the first casualty of hearing loss. So we think that that's what's happening first, and then subsequently might get things like damage to the inner ear structure, which for a long time we thought that's what it was all about. So noise is probably the big factor based on what we know from those laboratory studies.
And in terms of noise exposure then, so obviously loud music for myself, but what about other, like is it gunshots for, say, people in the military as an example of exposure? What are some of the trigger points, I guess, for those kind of symptoms?
Yeah, so I think noise exposure, some occupations have had noise exposure at high levels for many years. So obviously the military, where their levels a lot of their levels start at where our maximum levels of noise exposure are. Then there's many other occupations, farmers, often not wearing hearing protectors as well. Police in trains.
Yes, of course.
Those on ground air traffic control, ground staff.
Oh, planes and stuff.
And
factories, I guess.
Rock stars.
Failed rock stars. So clearly, I think this probably answers itself. But why is it important for us to know about it? Hidden hearing loss.
Well, I think the main thing is early detection leads to early intervention, or the possibility of early intervention. So if you don't detect, there's no chance of any intervention, any treatment at all. And so we've got, types of treatments available at the moment. Hearing aids is a big one and probably the mainstay of treatment. But also there's other factors too that we know about now. So hearing loss, we've known for a long time, is associated with lots of other sort of psychosocial effects. The first one, not the first, but one of which being people tend to isolate. If they can't hear things in a conversation, they tend to just withdraw a little bit. Hear humorous gags and things. That can often then lead to the depression, the isolation, or in kids can lead to poor educational outcomes. So we want to be aware of all those things to get some interventions. And the other one that's come about from other research in our institute too is that early or hearing loss that's undetected in the elderly, even younger, may lead to cognitive decline and dementia. So detection of hearing loss in any case, whether it be hidden or not hidden, is really important in terms of mitigation, intervention, and treatment.
And we keep hearing this, Stan. It's the hearing loss, but it's the impact of hearing loss. And that's why it's so important, the clinical work we're doing, as well as the research that we're doing to try and minimize that impact that the hearing loss has. And it's really, it's insightful to hear that even hidden hearing loss is really important for us to focus on, because that also has the impacts of hearing loss, even though it's hidden. So, David, as an audiologist, we follow a diagnostic test battery when every client comes in. That includes doing a detailed history, understanding where they're having difficulties. We do the audiogram, and that forms sort of part of the test. But we also do comprehensive speech testing to understand how well does the ear hear it, but how well does the brain actually able to understand those words that are being said. And some testing even includes sentence tests. So it really is a comprehensive test for us to understand what their needs are, what their hearing loss is, and how their brain sort of is able to understand speech. Is that a sufficient test to be able to identify hidden hearing loss? Or are you and your research team doing more work to improve that test battery?
Yeah, I think the first thing to say is that certainly those, what we might call ecologically valid, sounds like a fancy way to say things, but it's, saying in your natural environment, we're saying that the problem you have is, or the problem you're experiencing is in being able to hear speech in background noise.
Yeah.
So we think for sure those tests that you're doing in terms of testing patients with background noise and speech detection, absolutely is what we need to do more of. We've got the audiogram, that's great. It seems in a lot of cases to being the mainstay test, but we're moving away from that and moving to more ecologically valid testing. What we haven't yet got a handle on is that research that says, well, the first thing that sort of goes is the nerves. We know that in the laboratory. The world is still trying to find out what's the definitive test, in people, and as they're coming into the clinic, what's the definitive test for being able to put, say, some electrodes on the scalp and being able to detect that early nerve damage. And we think if we could get at that, we might actually even be able to get it at like really super, super early, be able to identify that early damage. But both approaches are important, and I think for sure the speech and noise testing is really important. Yep.
Yeah. So it's so important for us as audiologists and researchers to continue to work together to better understand how we better help these clients that are coming in and seeking help.
Yes, absolutely.
So the discovery that some noise-induced hearing loss is often due to damage to the nerve, what does this mean for possible treatment of that or even a cure?
Yeah, well, I think it opens up huge possibilities. So whereas before we thought that, and it's still textbook explanations, and it's sort of gradually disappearing from internet media that you might see about hearing loss, is that the traditional story was that with hearing loss, you get, or especially noise exposure, you get damage to the inner ear, the little cells inside called hair cells, and the little hair-like projections on top of those. The story was that they kind of crumble, and then the hair cells die, and then the treatment then is either, if they don't completely die, a hearing aid, or if they die completely, then a cochlear implant. But now we know that it's actually the nerves that are the first casualty, and the hair cells can actually survive. What we get is the nerves that sort of attach to those hair cells, and the hair cells sort of detect, hey, there's a sound, and the nerves sort of go, right, fire, and send that signal to the brain. And now we know the nerves are the first casualty. It offers a new hope for drug treatments because restoring hair cells, although we do some great work in that area at Ear Science, it's naturally a harder thing to get to the clinic than it is to potentially preserve this little bit of nerve damage, because the nerve just sort of separates from the hair cells. And the good news is we actually already were working on drug-based treatments for cochlear implants, where we knew that nerves would grow back towards a cochlear implant. So we've got sort of candidate drugs that we already thought, hey, these work in that case. Maybe they might work with this noise-induced hearing loss, hidden hearing loss, the nerve damage. And myself and others have done studies where we've shown, that actually preserves that synapse, that connection between the nerve and the hair cells. So it opens up the possibility for drug treatments. And there are actually already trials underway in the States and elsewhere for drugs such as the one that I was working on. Some of the results are promising. Some of them more challenging, as happens in
research.
Absolutely. But there is a lot of activity in this space now, and there are a lot of researchers and a lot of effort towards coming up with new drug treatments, not just the one that I was working on, but other approaches where we can look at that damage to the nerve and go, hey, what factors normally affect that synapse in development? How can we sort of rescue that synapse and potentially grow those nerves back towards those hair cells?
Wow.
And I think we have different potential ways that we know of delivering those drugs. So, we already deliver drugs to the inner ear, ENT surgeon deliver that under certain circumstances. And we know sort of somewhat how to do that delivery mechanism. So we've got the means of delivery, the potential that we know that it's rescuable now, and new drug treatments that we think the horizon is getting much closer than I would have said 10 years ago.
Wow.
Yep.
That's so powerful. Knowing almost where the problem is allows you to focus your attention.
Yes, absolutely.
I think there's a whole lot of research going into just finding where the problem is. And now you've sort of got to that point, and now it's working on how you can improve that.
Absolutely. And we're drilling down to like, where exactly is that problem in that synapse? Working on treatments for that.
Exciting. So, David, we've talked obviously about the research you're doing, with nerves and hair cells and stuff. What about the other side of this research? So, for example, occupational, so let's say the military and some of the dealing with the people who might be at risk of this hidden hair loss. Have you done some research in that area?
Yeah, great question. Actually, I have. Yeah, and so that population is in the military. And they are, why would I be interested in that population?
Yep.
It's because really it's such a huge problem for the military. So you can imagine noise exposure is a big problem. It's their levels of exposure are quite extreme. They have hearing protectors, but the sound that some of the noise overcomes those earmuffs or hearing protectors. So it's very loud. And about 1/3 or 30% of soldiers returning from overseas, US, Australia, elsewhere, have hearing loss, and it's actually one of the biggest problems for the military. So not only interested in hearing loss, of any type, military, but also hidden hearing loss. So I have done studies where in defence populations on Defence Force bases, recruited soldiers who have normal audiograms, so they're past the standard pure tone audiogram test, but in other testing where we've measured their self-reported noise exposure and their difficulties that they have in conversations, they have reported they've got difficulties. And what we've tried to do there is run through a battery of tests, some of those ones to detect that early nerve damage. And they be sort of test with electrodes like EEG type brainwave type activity to sounds, and other ones with little microphones inside the ear to detect the wobble of the hair cells. And also like other types of audiogram, like a high frequency audiogram, listening in for those high frequencies that
the high-pitched sounds.
The high-pitched sounds, like the consonants, like the S that I just did into the microphone. They're really high-pitched, and so we know anecdotally with kids that they can hear those great, and as you get older, those sort of start to drop off. And we think that there's evidence now that type of test might be a really good early test for hidden hearing loss as well. It tends to sort of drop off earlier than some of the lower frequency tones. So I've done research in the defence population. I'd like to expand those studies. Need more people because you need a lot of participants to try to get that 5 or more % out. And those studies ongoing. Yeah.
And actually that segues beautifully to the next question. There may be someone out there listening today who's thinking, wow, that's me, what you've just described. What can we do to help them?
Well, I think the first thing is to reach out to your GP, to an audiologist, to online hearing provider, and seek help.
Yes.
So seek to get a hearing test. Because we said before, early detection leads to early intervention.
Yeah.
And I think that's really the main first thing to do.
Yep.
And if there's a hearing loss, we have some treatments that we might be able to offer to you. They can be assistive listening devices and hearing aids. And studies have shown already that at least 2 studies have shown that people who have those hidden hearing loss difficulties do benefit from a hearing aid. Not everybody has, but many people have benefited from the hearing aid.
Yep.
And also, if you are going in and getting that hearing test, finding an audiologist, it's important for the audiologist and the person going in for the hearing test to make sure they get that high frequency testing and the speech and noise testing, because those are 2 tests that we can add to our test battery to maybe just identify those people that may be presenting normal on their standard audiogram, but presenting with hidden hearing loss.
Yes.
So that could be something that somebody out there that's thinking, that's me,
yeah.
how they can advocate for themselves.
Yep.
Yes. And then the treatment, we see great success in the clinic with hearing aids. We see great success with assistive listening devices. So if it's just in some situations where you have difficulty, you can use maybe a headphone. But there are newer technologies or newer devices that are coming out now that we call, like a wearable, an Apple Watch. You call it a hearable, so it sits in your ear. So it is a device that can help you maybe just hear in background noise, even if you don't need the sound necessarily amplified. So that's a good option for some people. As an audiologist, I do recommend that you see an audiologist first to really understand what your hearing levels are, where your difficulties are, so you can have a good baseline test. And a good audiologist will be able to navigate you to what the options are, and not just go, well, you've got normal hearing, you've got all those difficulties, and that's a little bit of bad luck. It's not that. A good audiologist will be able to navigate those options for you and with you.
So I did make mention in a previous podcast, Dave, I used to actually work in a steel factory as well. And this is back in the 90s when there wasn't really an emphasis on ear protection particularly. It was optional. And there was just those horrible foam ear things in the corner that, were free to take. I imagine now that there's a lot more emphasis with workplace health and safety about hearing protection particularly. But it probably starts also with our kids. Like my kids listen to devices and I can sometimes hear the headphones noise from a while away. So how important is prevention, in terms of protecting our hearing in environments where you're mowing the lawn and you put, something on to try and mitigate the noise? How important is that at that stage?
It's absolutely critical. We've talked about sort of early detection and treatments, but prior to that, is protection. If we could avoid every case of hearing loss, especially noise-induced hearing loss, all the better. So I think, we've come a long way in terms of hearing protection. The devices that look a lot nicer. But and some of the headphones now that we're wearing can have some of those protective effects as well. The interesting thing in the research about that nerve damage that occurs, it occurs at levels much lower than we previously thought as well. So we need to be really careful. Levels that have been sort of accepted as the safe levels for over 2 hours sort of level of exposure, or 8 hours of exposure, are now actually seen as causing some damage in laboratory studies. So we just need to, no matter what, we just need to be really super careful with our hearing. And we know kids, especially, the World Health Organization has indicated that it's a big number, 1 billion children sort of are at risk of hearing loss due to playing personal audio devices simply too loud through headphones.
Wow.
So we need to spread the message that hearing protection and reducing the volume of noise in our environment, noise and music in our environment.
So it's not just about treatments and cures. It's about advocating for
Yeah.
stopping it,
Yeah.
before what happens,
That's right.
especially something with noise-induced hearing loss. We spoke to, or we will speak to Professor Marcus Atlas and Dr. Elaine Wong about genetic causes of hearing loss. We can't change that. So we need to manage those well. But if we can prevent some of hearing loss, it's so powerful.
Yep.
Yes.
And we can do that ourselves.
Yep.
David, often in the clinic we see people that come in, they present with tinnitus, and they've got the normal audiogram, the standard audiogram. So is tinnitus a typical presentation for somebody with hidden hearing loss?
Yes, actually, I mean, the very first studies that were done, or the one that coined the term hidden hearing loss, was in fact looking just exactly at that.
Okay.
So they looked at people who had tinnitus and had normal audiograms, and found that they also had other issues, the hidden hearing loss. But yeah, tinnitus is really tightly linked in research to noise-induced hearing loss in particular. So a lot of researchers would say that they hypothesize that tinnitus is basically an early warning sign that there is some noise-induced hearing loss, some damage to the inner ear. It's the cells or the nerves ringing out in response to some damage in the inner ear. And it's my area in the military, it's a huge problem there too. So it's not just a hearing loss, it's the tinnitus and the constant ringing in the ears is a huge problem for the returned soldiers as well.
Yeah. We actually had Sasha on in our season 1 of the podcast, and she went into everything tinnitus. So if there are any listeners sort of thinking, what is tinnitus, or I have tinnitus, what can I do? Definitely listen to Sasha Benatar, and she gives a great description and some good tools.
Yep.
David, what do you really want to convey to the listeners today?
Well, I think the number one thing is to take care of your hearing. The second one is if you have some indication that, you're turning up the TV volume a bit more, you can't quite hear the sounds, of every bit of speech in the TV, or your partner at a noisy restaurant, then seek help. Really important to get out there and seek help. Talk to your doctor, talk to an audiologist, and try to get that testing in, and the type of testing where it's more that real world testing. The other one is around just basically there's getting a regular hearing test. So you can't just do it. You don't just do it once and then go, it's all okay. So we need to do it regularly. So every couple of years, come back for a hearing test, because things can change over that time. And the other one's about the research. There's promise on the horizon, I think. So there's greater tests coming.
Yep.
And the potential of new treatments, both with better hearing aids and potential drug treatments on the horizon.
Well, David, thank you so much for joining us today. Your research is so important to help us understand hearing loss can be different for different people and can affect us in different ways. We appreciate all you're doing in your research to provide the support people need to live long, healthy lives and hear properly. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Make sure to tune into the next episode with Dr. Tommy Lai, called Hearing and Your GP. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that we are recording this podcast on, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and the land on which you're listening from. We pay respects to Aboriginal elders past, present and emerging. If you've enjoyed this episode, let us know by rating and reviewing this podcast or sharing it with a friend or family member. Make sure you're subscribed so you won't miss an episode. To view this episode as a video with captions, visit the Ear Science YouTube channel or our website www.earscience.org.au/podcast. You can also visit our website to suggest a topic for a future episode, for links to more information and all the research papers on this topic that we have discussed today. This podcast provides information of a general nature and does not constitute medical advice. The producer of the Ear Science podcast, The Science of Healthy Hearing, is Emma Ireland, with sound engineering and editing by myself, Dan Vandermeer.